Hello and welcome to The Children Are Not Okay, Impact of Domestic Violence. I'm Jane Straub, the Victim Assistance Specialist at Jacob Wetterling Resource Center. JWRC is a missing person and victim survivor advocacy agency, as well as we provide numerous prevention education opportunities for professionals, families, individuals, and children. JWRC is a component of Gunderson National Child Protection Training Center, which is a department within Gunderson Health System of La Crosse, Wisconsin. This is our agenda today. It looks as though we have quite a bit of information to cover. Hopefully, as we move from topic to topic, you will see how they are linked and related. This is tough work. This is often work that is personal. If you find yourself reacting to anything in this presentation, if you find yourself having a hard time, please take a break, take a moment to take care of yourself. This is a tool that I often use with survivors if someone is being triggered, and I thought we could just go through this so you could have this for your own tools, either to use for yourself or to use with someone else that you're working with. So just using the 5 senses and having people get back to here and now out of the trigger. So first, what I want people to do is ground themselves. So whether you're seated or standing, it doesn't matter, but I really want you to feel your feet connected to the ground. Take a couple breaths, just in and out, to kind of regulate your breathing, and then we're going to go through the 5 senses. So I want you to look around the room, and I want you to identify 5 things that you can see. I want you to feel your feet touching the ground, and I want you to identify 4 things that you can feel or you can touch. It may be a sensation, it may be an item, it may be something soft, something hard, something cold, something warm. I want you to think about 3 things that you can hear. You can hear my voice. You may hear a fan running. You may hear a dog barking. You may hear a car driving by. I want you to think of 2 things that you can smell. It may be the shampoo that you use, your perfume. You may have a candle on your desk or some lotion. And taste. And this is the most important. Please make it a habit to always have mints, hard candy, gum, something that you can have in your mouth, again, either for yourself or someone that you're working with. What this does when you're tasting the candy and when you're going through the 5 senses, it takes you out of that amygdala hijack. So when you're triggered, when you're fearful, you're using that emotional brain, and we want you to get back to this rational brain. So going through this set of 5 senses helps get you back to the here and now. So please feel free to use this for yourself or for other people. Another tool is just having a photo or an image that relaxes you, that makes you smile, that calms you down. These are actually my toes, and sometimes it's just my toes that make me smile when I look at this picture, although I have to say the pool and the ocean and the sky are pretty wonderful as well. This is obviously not Minneapolis, but someplace very different that's very relaxing. Abuse is not just what happens to an individual. Abuse is not only physical, sexual, or emotional harm. It is truly a denial of human rights. We all have the right to be secure, to feel safe, to have dignity, to live without fear, to be connected and supported, and to be ourselves, to be independent, and to make our own decisions. This is bigger than just categorizing abuse as domestic violence or sexual violence or child abuse. I will let you read this on your own. This is the definition of domestic violence from the U.S. Department of Justice, and you can see it's quite comprehensive. There are quite a few behaviors that are included within this definition. These are types of abuse within a relationship. This is abuse that happens during the relationship and perhaps after the relationship has ended. Sometimes the violence and the abuse continues. Sexual assault and stalking may occur outside of a relationship, but we know that these behaviors frequently occur within the context of a relationship. We will briefly discuss the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. What happens in childhood it may have lifelong impact on physical health, sexual health, emotional health, and general well-being. This picture is an excellent representation of the impact of domestic violence, which is absolutely an adverse childhood experience. I think this is an example of a picture tells the story. Again, briefly, the ACE study confirms with scientific evidence that adversity early in life increases physical, mental, and behavioral problems later in life. The original study included over 17,000 participants, and as of 2014, so I'm sure this is even more in 2015 and 16, but as of 2014, 28 states had collected ACE data. Surprisingly or not, regardless of where or when this data was collected, it has very similar results to the original study. We find that ACEs are common. They occur in all zip codes. They rarely occur in isolation. Again, these are the results from the original ACE study, and a couple things I'd like to go over that relate to what we're talking about today. First of all, when we look at sexual abuse, we can see that 24.7% of women and 16% of men say that they experienced some type of sexual abuse while they were growing up. We often hear the statistics of 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys, and this is where that comes from. I think what people have problems with is when they hear sexual abuse, many people think that all sexual abuse means rape or forced penetration. And we know that there are very many behaviors that are sexually abusive and sexually harmful. And we know that kids are exposed to many of these. So I think sometimes when we just throw out the statistic of 1 in 4 or 1 in 6, that seems too many, and people have a really hard time believing that. But we know that children are exposed to quite an array of abusive behaviors that are sexual in nature. The other thing that I think is really interesting is looking at household mental illness. And the ACE study is a retrospective study, so it's asking adults, as you were growing up, did you experience this? And I think it's very interesting that we have a very large difference in women saying that they experienced household mental illness and men. So 23.3% of women said, yes, while I was growing up, there was someone in my house that struggled with mental illness, while only 14.8% of men cited that. I think it's very interesting. I think there may be different reasons why sometimes girls have to take, if it's mom that was dealing with mental illness, sometimes the daughters are the ones that take over some of the caregiving, some of the household duties. We also are working very hard, but we still have kind of this disconnect between what is mental illness, can we control it, is there something wrong with us, and this idea that, you know, men may be less likely to talk about mental illness, realize mental illness is going on. But I think it's just very interesting that there's that big difference, and I think it absolutely needs to have a discussion. And then we're looking at the number of adverse childhood experiences. So having 4 or more, we have 15.2% of women and 9.2% of men. So we do have a little bit of a difference. And again, it's retrospective. So what was their perception of what their household was like as they were growing up? But we have the 10 categories. So the 3 types of abuse, the 2 types of neglect, and then the 5 behaviors that are considered household dysfunction. And so your ACE score is basically you look at, did these things happen? And then we kind of add them up. So what was found in the original ACE study was that 36% of people said, I didn't have any of those things happen, which means that 64% of people did. 64% of people said, you know what, I had at least one of those things happening. So we know that ACEs happen and we know that they're common. ACEs tend to come in groups. Here is where we start linking domestic violence to child abuse. If you witnessed mom being battered, so if you witnessed domestic violence, you have a 95% chance of experiencing an additional adverse childhood experience. 95%. That's pretty high. If you witnessed mom being battered, if domestic violence was happening in your household, you have a 52% chance that there were 5 other things going on in the house. We have to look at this. We have done such a better job of identifying domestic violence, but we need to be sure that we're linking it to the other things that are going on in the house. And when we identify one adverse experience, we need to make sure that we're screening or we're looking for or we're asking questions about what else is going on. And as I talked about, the ACE score is, you add them up. It's not just simple math. It's not just adding up the ACE score. We know that polyvictimization, experiencing many different forms of victimization, is more highly related to trauma than experiencing victimization of a single type. The dose response. The steps. As you will see in the upcoming slides, the more adversity that's occurring, the higher the risk of health problems. If you witness domestic violence, child abuse may be occurring. In a 2010 study from David Finkelhor and Sherry Hamby, their study showed that 31%, so 1 in 3 children who witnessed domestic violence also reported being physically abused themselves. And we can see it on this slide. How often do you witness domestic violence? So purple is very often, blue is often, so often or very often. And then look at how many children were also experiencing emotional abuse, physical abuse, or sexual abuse themselves. If there is alcohol abuse going on in the home, look at the impact on domestic violence. Look at mother being treated violently and look at the impact on mental illness. So we're starting to see all of these links within these behaviors. Here is the link between alcohol abuse and child abuse. We saw the link between domestic violence and child abuse. We saw the link between alcohol abuse and domestic violence, and now we go full circle to see the link between alcohol abuse and child abuse. And we have to acknowledge the risk of sexual abuse. It is the most frequent type of abuse in relation to alcohol abuse. It is just staring at us, that purple graph there of sexual abuse. And I think it's interesting. I think we also need to think about all of the sexual violence that is linked to alcohol use or abuse, especially for our young people. The college life, right? The issue of sexual abuse on college campuses and alcohol. What happens at bars? What happens at parties? What happens when alcohol is linked to sexual violence? Here we start to see the impact of childhood playing out in adulthood. So if my ACE score was 3, 4, or 5, I have a much higher risk of being sexually assaulted as an adult. Witnessing domestic violence as a child to becoming a victim of domestic violence as an adult to becoming an offender of domestic violence as an adult. In addition to ACE study data, research shows that the greatest risk factor for experiencing domestic violence in adulthood is exposure to parental violence as a child. This is the cycle. This is what we need to interrupt. These are the behaviors that we need to identify, we need to screen for, and we need to find out if it's happening. We will talk about the concept of power and control next. I'm including this power and control wheel for your use. I prefer things to be linear. I'm more of an algebra person versus geometry, so to me I can go through this list better in my brain. Really what we're talking about is the idea of power over versus power with. And within a context of relationship, when we see abuse and violence, we see power, the need for power, the need for control being a very large part of that abuse. So again, if we talk about power over, we're talking about control of another person. We also may be talking about taking away that other person's power or that other person's control. So when we talk about power over, there's some other words that pop up. We're talking about coercive behaviors. We're talking about trying to gain compliance from that person. We want control. We need dominance. We act dismissive to that person, that we don't really care, that we're not invested. And we use punishment to get power. Versus a relationship that uses power with. It is a supportive relationship. There's cooperation, right? You're influencing back and forth what's going on. You're working together. You appreciate what that other person brings, and instead of punishment, you receive feedback. So it's very different. We know that offenders, they want the power and control, and they want it with the goal of creating victims who feel powerless. They use many means to gain and maintain control. So you can take a look at this list and you can see different types of abuse and the methods that may be used. Look at what bullies do versus what domestic violence offenders do versus what sexual harassment uses versus stalking versus sexual violence. You can see the methods that people use to gain control, to gain compliance over another person. And we have to realize it is not always a fair fight. So sometimes we look at the survivor or we look at the victim and we try to have them be the ones that take responsibility. The offenders are always responsible for their behaviors. So let's discuss the cycle of violence. And we're going to use the cycle of violence to really describe the tactics of control that are used in unhealthy relationships. We're going to go through the cycle the first time describing a domestic violence relationship, and then we're going to go through it a second time through the eyes of a child witnessing domestic violence. So first of all, up on top we have the honeymoon period. Relationship has just started. Everyone's on their best behavior. It's new. It's exciting. And sometimes what we do is we have this misperception that we're starting out from ground zero, that it's a clean slate. And we have to realize that people are bringing their past into these relationships. Sometimes what happens is you start a relationship with someone and you know that person has been in horrible relationships before, but there's something about the human spirit or optimism that we think, with me, it will be different. And sometimes what we do is we completely ignore those past behaviors. Many times what we do is we try to adhere blame on the partners, the ex-partners of our new partner. Well, it must have been them, it must have been something that they did. And what we do is we fail to look at maybe patterns of behaviors. But we do need to acknowledge that we bring in our history to relationships. Whether that's good or bad, it's probably a combination of both, but we all bring in history to new relationships. So what happens in a relationship is conflict will occur. Conflict occurs in every relationship. It occurs more often in unhealthy relationships, but it occurs in healthy relationships. Conflict means it may be a disagreement. It may be an opposing argument. It may be a dispute. It may be something going on that's preventing agreement. But there's just something where we're just not agreeing. And in healthy relationships, what we do is we problem solve. We use conflict resolution, and we work through it. In relationships that are violent, that are unhealthy, what happens is that conflict causes tension. The conflict, the problem does not get solved, and so it begins to fester. As the person who wants power, so as the person who we can label as the offender, conflict to me feels like you just don't listen. You're just not paying attention. If you would only do this the way that I want it done, everything would be wonderful. Why can't you just do it? Conflict as a person who has less power, or the partner who may be abused, feels like I'm working so hard to be careful. I'm watching everything I say. I'm watching everything I do. And if I could only do this right, everything would be okay. And what happens is that conflict never gets resolved, and that tension builds and it builds. And that tension to the person who's offending feels like they're starting to lose power and control. And the need to get that back, I will use violence. Now, violence can be an array of behaviors. I may just threaten you, I may yell at you, I may scream at you, I may threaten to break up with you, I may threaten to tell a secret about you, I may break something that's very valuable to you. I may emotionally abuse you, physically abuse you, or sexually abuse you, but I do something to get your attention, to give me the control back. Now, after that happens, we start edging back up to the honeymoon period. I apologize. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. I maybe start to blame alcohol, to blame drugs, to blame stress, to blame a bad day at work, to blame you. Well, if you wouldn't make me so angry, I wouldn't have to act this way. And what happens in a relationship, the question is, do you believe me? And truly in our heart, the question is, do you want to believe me? And of course you want to believe me because you love me. And what we need to understand is you do not have the power to change another person. You do not have the power to fix another person. You do not have, it's not your job, right? Sometimes maybe I just didn't love that person enough, or if I could love that person more. Love and abuse are not the same thing. You don't take away abuse and violence by love. That person is choosing to treat you in a way that is less than how you deserve to be treated. And what we see in violent relationships is we see this cycle, and it continues. And sometimes what happens is the conflict builds, and the tension builds, and the violence escalates, and sometimes it actually escalates to a point of being a homicide. And what we need to do is we need to break the cycle. And sometimes breaking the cycle may mean ending the relationship. But it is always important that that person does something to keep themselves safe. It is not your job to help that other person to stop. I support that other person, yes, but don't have yourself in the line of fire while you're doing it. This person, through their behavior, has been telling you, I don't think you're worthy. I don't think you deserve to be safe. I don't think you deserve dignity. All of these things, and we need to pay attention to it. Now, let's go through it as the children witness it. So what do they see with conflict? Abuse, right? Conflict means abuse. And I think this is really interesting when I'm in a high school class, and I'll just put this up and I'll say, what do you think of when you hear the word conflict? And one of the most common responses is, it's a fight. That's so interesting. Right? That's a very quick escalation, right? Conflict does not always mean fight or does not always mean abuse, right? Conflict is a normal occurring behavior. We have conflict all of the time. But this concept that conflict, it just escalates right to fight. So I find that very interesting. But for children who are watching domestic violence, that is what conflict means. Conflict means abuse. Conflict means you don't talk about your problem. You don't problem solve. Conflict to them looks like one person gets what they want, even if they have to use force or manipulation to get it. One person's needs get met at the expense of another, and we also see that avoiding conflict is often modeled. Sometimes people try to avoid conflict in a way to avoid abuse. They learn a lot about emotions, right? One person is free to express emotion, especially if it's anger or aggression, while the other person is not. And if that other person does express emotion, the reaction is typically they're being hysterical or they're overreacting or it has to do with drama. We see anger being used to gain control, and we see emotions not being regulated. There's no modeling of appropriate reactions to what you do when you're angry or you're sad or you're scared. We see violence being learned. Violence is acceptable. Violence works to solve our problems or to get our needs met. Kids learn a lot about silence and shame. We don't talk about this to anybody. We don't even talk about it to each other, right? In our own home, this is happening, and we don't talk about it. It happens, and then nobody talks about it. We pretend like it didn't happen. And think of how heavy that silence and shame can be on children. Excuses. Right? I don't need to take responsibility for my actions or my relationship. I can blame my partner. I can blame alcohol. I can blame drugs. I can blame stress. It's not my fault that I'm acting this way. They learn a lot about harm. I can harm my partner. I can harm my children. I can harm my pets. Right? And we know that animal abuse is very much linked to domestic violence and to child abuse, right? Harming something that is very important to you, a pet. Breaking their things, right? I can break something that belongs to anybody else. And I can use this as a way to harm or to punish another person. It's punishment. It's their fault that it happened. They learn about undermining another person. They may team up with a person who has power because they think that's going to keep them safe, right? I'm going to be on dad's side or whoever the abuser is, because if I'm with that person, if I can make that person happy, then I won't get harmed. And what they don't realize is they're doing the same behavior that mom is doing. That's what mom is doing. She's trying to appease. She's trying to ally. She's trying to keep dad happy, right? But in that ally with the abuser, that child starts to hear why this other person deserves to be punished, why this other person deserves abuse, why this other person is worthless. And they may start to believe those things about one of their parents. They learn a lot about safety, what they need to do to be safe, how they need to try to appease someone to be safe. They may also see how sex is used. Sex is used to punish. Sex is used to be safe, right? After an argument happens, forced sex may happen. Sex may be used for the person who's being abused to try to make up to the person, to try to make them happy, to try to appease them. And they see this concept of sex very dangerous, not consensual, right? Not about both persons' needs being met, but very one-sided. If you click on this link, it will take you to additional photos and it will tell you the story behind the photos. I'm going to talk about these three. The first one I want to talk about is up in the left-hand side, so the little girl over by the stove. Fighting the abuse happens and the kids wake up, right? They know it's happening. They don't need to be in the same room. They don't need to witness it, but they know it's happening. Oftentimes they do witness it. An interesting study from NPR found in brain scans of infants that they have heightened reaction even when they're sleeping if their parents are arguing. So it is affecting these infants when they're asleep. And they found that in homes where there is lots of conflict, there was a heightened amount of activation in that brain scan. The second picture, so on the top right, we may have mom saying, go back to bed, everything will be okay, or she may even be scolding or yelling at the child, right? Go back to bed, I told you to go back to bed. And what's happening in all this is the child's fear and the sadness are not being attended to because right now, mom is in survival mode. Mom is doing everything she can do to stay safe, and child is left out. The picture in the bottom left, kids sometimes try to intervene, and there may be different things going on. Maybe this child is trying to get in the middle, right? She's trying to kind of break it up. She might be going to mom to comfort mom because mom is crying. She may be going to mom to get comfort herself because she's scared. But we can see in these situations how many children could be injured when domestic violence is happening. We talked about most of these within the cycle of violence. Children learn what they live, and domestic violence is a very scary lesson. We need to give these children an alternate story because this may be all that they know. They don't know what a healthy relationship is. They don't know how to solve conflict. They don't know how to regulate their emotions. They don't know how to treat another person. We kind of just have these perceptions, false beliefs that people just automatically know these things. And I think we need to go back and say, they may not. Just as we teach math and reading to kids, we need to teach about relationships, and we need to teach about problem solving, and we need to teach about trust. We need to teach about all of these things. I was in a high school talking about healthy relationships, and afterwards I had a student come up and he said to me, I grew up in a home where my dad abused my mom, and she has now been in 3 relationships since then that have been extremely abusive. And he said to me, I have no idea what a healthy relationship looks like. So sometimes what we do is, we say, hey, violence is bad. We need to get rid of the violence. But we need to offer a behavior to replace it. What is a healthy relationship? What is trust? Right? What is healing? What is working together? What are these things, these skills and behaviors that people need? Because a lot of these kids, it's not modeled for them and they don't know. And then we see some of these behaviors being repeated in school, right? How they're treating their classmates as they get older in relationships that we have. We need to supplement their learning with kindness and empathy and compassion, and provide them with the skills that they need to have, right? They're not going to have them. We can't expect these kids to do these things without us teaching them how to do it. These are reactions, and I have in my notes in quotes, normal. These are normal reactions, excuse me, to abnormal situations. I think as you look at these, you could also see how some of these behaviors may be perceived as the kids being naughty, right? The kids acting out, the kids misbehaving. And when you have parents who are stressed out and frustrated and annoyed, right, they may be punishing children. And we know that some punishment that parents use is actually very abusive, right? So we may have kids reacting to the domestic violence that they're seeing, and they're acting out, and then they're being abused because it's being seen as being naughty or acting out. As people that work with children or have children that we care for, we really need to look at these behaviors, and if needed, we need to address the domestic violence, and we need to address the safety of the children. What is behind these behaviors? Right? What is behind this acting out? What is going on that this child is reacting this way? Domestic violence effects on children. I'm being harmed. My life is chaotic and unpredictable. No one is there to take care of me. It's scary at home. I don't sleep or eat well. I can't concentrate at school. I can't tell anybody what's going on. I'm sad, I'm scared, I'm angry, I'm frustrated. I don't know how to regulate my emotions. I don't know how to calm down. I didn't sleep at home last night. I don't have any of my toys or my cat. And someone is trying to take me away from my parents. These are all things going on in children's minds, right? And just think of how hard it is to do math when this is what you're thinking of, right? And these are things we have to look at, the social, the emotional effects. We have to look at their learning. It's going to be very hard for kids to be learning when this is what they're focusing on. If they're in a shelter, if they're homeless, if they've been removed and they're in foster care, right? All of these things that these kids are dealing with is very stressful. How do children react? So the top picture, Ken and Barbie, I'm kind of looking at this picture and I wonder, what is Ken saying to Barbie? Is Ken leaning in to kiss Barbie? Is Ken leaning in to intimidate Barbie? Right? We know that kids' actions come out in play. It comes out in art. It comes out in things that they do. The bottom left, it looks like my arm is around you, but really I'm controlling you, and I'm also hurting you at the same time. The two little boys, it's okay for me to hurt and intimidate others. And the little girl and the baby doll, this one breaks my heart every time I look at it. Here, her one hand is all the way up, right? It is ready to smack down on that little baby's bottom. Her other hand is actually holding the baby down. It looks as though she may be saying something, right? Bad baby, naughty baby. And she's even pulled down the panties of the doll. That's so impactful. Hopefully when you look at this list of behaviors, it starts to make sense. Why do children react this way, right? I understand they're dealing with domestic violence. These are also behaviors that sometimes young people get in trouble for and actually may be criminalized for. In the 2015 report, Sexual Abuse to Prison Pipeline, it highlights the juvenile justice system and how girls are being incarcerated for actions that actually may keep them safe. Girls running away from sexual abuse in the home, right? And then they're runaways, or then they're truant, they're self-medicating. They're using drugs or alcohol to help them cope with the abuse that has happened. Sometimes girls are becoming pregnant because they're unable to protect themselves, right? So we need to see the person behind the behavior, and these kids certainly don't need more labels, right? We have a lot of labels that we like to give kids, people. They don't need labels. They need somebody to understand this behavior. I'm not going to spend much time on this slide, but I just wanted to introduce the concept of abuse, intimidation, and manipulation continuing for the abused parent and for the children throughout the separation, throughout the custody hearings, and throughout the divorce. And how so many times children are being used post-separation. I'm sure we all have a lot of stories about how, for some of our families, the family court system is very toxic. Just the idea of some people trying to get out of an unhealthy relationship to try to keep themselves safe or their kids safe, and how frustrating it is to do that with the court systems. And again, we have to recognize these behaviors. We have to acknowledge that these behaviors are going on and how harmful it is for those children. In extreme cases, we know that domestic violence may lead to homicide. Law enforcement, advocates, the court system, improvements are happening every day in the way that lethality is being assessed and addressed. The next two slides are common questions or concerns that are addressed in most lethality assessments, but it's so important to have these questions asked. Were weapons used? Do they have access to weapons? Has this person talked about suicide? What are the threats that have been made? Has this person ever strangled the victim? Is there violence toward children, violence towards animals? Has the violence escalated? All of these questions help survivors understand the true and accurate threat to their lives. Questionnaires and calendars are used, and advocates and law enforcement can go through with those calendars, and they can see escalations, and they can start to see the true risk. And sometimes that's what that survivor needs. Domestic violence survivors are very good at predicting future violence, but we found they're not as good at predicting lethality. So we really need these lethality assessments to be used. And again, these are just some of the ones that are most commonly used. So you can go and and check these out on your own time. As stated on the earlier slide, more than half of victims and offenders interact with the court system, with healthcare, or with victim services within 1 year prior to the murder. Right? These kids are at school. Mom and dad may be coming to school. Right? The police may be coming to the home. They may be going to the doctor's office for injuries. These people are coming to work. They work with us. Right? They're not all at the domestic violence shelter. So are we screening? Are we asking questions? And are we listening to what people are really trying to tell us? Here's a model wheel for nurturing children, ways that we can support children. We can help them to develop pro-social skills, teaching them about self-care, and teaching them about healthy relationships. So you have this, you can go through and look at the different categories. Most importantly, I think we really need to look at resilience. Ann Maston from the University of Minnesota calls resilience everyday magic. Right? It's just little ways that we can build up children. We know that children are resilient. We know that people are resilient. We know that the brain has the power to heal itself. We know it has plasticity and it can repair. We know that the human spirit can endure quite a bit, but we need to make sure that we're teaching resiliency as a skill, just as we teach anything else. Step by step, we teach kids math. Step by step, we teach them reading. Step by step, we teach them science. Step by step, we teach them ways to take care of themselves. We teach them ways to take care of their emotions, right? We teach them ways to calm themselves. All of these things these kids need, these skills that they need to have. And again, when we think of how difficult it may be for some of these kids just to get up and get to school each day, can we take time to, authentically say to these kids, thank you so much for coming to school ready to learn. I am so happy to see you. And when our clients come in the door, thank you so much for coming to meet with me today. I am so glad to see you. Right? Just these people have worth. They need to understand that they have worth. And what can we do to help them understand it? And I think so many times for survivors, they don't have the realization that they are survivors, because this is not the place where they want to be long term. And sometimes, we kind of get stuck in the here and now, and they're not seeing maybe the steps that they've made. And so sometimes we need to say, wow, look at how far you've come, or look what's going on in your life, or this is such a wonderful thing, and help them to notice and help them to move forward. Because the fact is, they're still here. And what can we do to support them? Resiliency. I love this chart. I love to look at it, and I love to, for myself, say, what are my strengths? What are things that keep me going every day? What are some things that I can do for self-care? What are some things that if I'm having a tough day, this I know I can count on. I can count on myself to keep going. And when we work with children who have been abused, or children that witness domestic violence, or we're working with parents who have been abused, they're really not seeing a lot of positives in themselves. So if you can think of every child that you come into contact with, or you can think of every client that you work with, look at this list and pick out 5 traits or characteristics or skills that these people have, and let them know that you see this in them. And give concrete examples, right? We had a time about 15 years ago where we used all this inflated self-esteem, and we realized it didn't really do our kids any good, right? People need concrete examples of things that they're doing and how it's positive. And have them, maybe there's something that they see in themselves that we don't see, which is a huge thing. In a little bit, you can pick out a couple and say, hey, I think it would be really good if we work on this, right? Let's work on some problem solving, right? Let's work on some goals. Let's work on flexibility, right? Because it's very hard when you come from a world where you don't have any control and all of a sudden you want to have control. There was a little girl that one of the schools I was working with, and I knew there was a lot of domestic violence going on, and so she had absolutely no control when she was at home. So when she was at school, she was the master manipulator, and it was driving the teacher crazy. But this little girl needed control, but she was using it in ways that were harmful to the rest of her classmates, right? She was using power over, control over. And sometimes what happens in this need to have control, we lose our ability to be flexible, right? Because we want this to happen, then we want this to happen. And so helping people move forward, but having flexibility is a huge thing. So again, what can you let people know that they're doing well? Because honestly, a woman or a man who has just left an abusive relationship, their self-worth is pretty low. So they're going to have a hard time identifying the strengths that they have. Social emotional learning, the skills that children need to learn. They need to have these. This is the foundation for kids to be able to do anything else. And these, again, are skills that may be lacking, in homes where domestic violence is occurring, right? So we can't punish kids for the lack of skills that they have. We need to make sure that we're teaching the skills. And we can teach these skills to all children, right? This is kind of our flu inoculation, right? We give everybody immunization for flu, and it's going to make it so less people get it, and it's going to make it so maybe if one person gets it, it won't be as bad, right? But we're going to treat everybody the same way and give everybody the skills that they need. And then those other kids are going to help the other children with those skills. It's not just that we're going to, separate the kids who we know are struggling. Everybody's going to get these skills. Deposits versus withdrawals, right? Our little kids are these little piggy banks, right? Simple math. Make sure your positive interactions outnumber the negative ones. Assume the children and families that we work with, they may be coming in with a negative balance, right? So what can we do? What are some positive things we can offer them to offset those deficits and try to make them into deposits? This is my favorite slide. If you've attended another one of my presentations, you've probably seen this. I'm sure I could actually spend an hour just on this slide, but we don't have that. But what we do is we need people to have ways to make themselves feel better. The wonderful thing is we know so much more about physical and emotional health. We know about the impact of stress and trauma. We know about the healing quality of nature and music and the arts. And we know about the importance of self-care, right? So there's so many resources out there. And what a gift to teach children these skills so they can have them for a lifetime, right? For some of us, we're just learning about yoga now, right? We're just learning about adult coloring books now as we're older. And these are skills that we can give children to last a lifetime. Nutrition, huge. Simple question. What did you have to eat today? Right? When you're talking to somebody. Diet is huge, right? We need balanced diets. Kids and adults need to be eating good food, right? What have you had to eat today? And is there something healthy that I can give you? The lighting that we use, right? Lighting in schools is typically horrible. It's fluorescent lights, right? Turn those off, turn on the lamps, right? Sometimes we can have lights out. We can kind of cool down, right? The lights go off, the temperature goes down. What do we have that's soft versus hard, right? Sitting in a desk versus having a pillow to sit on or a beanbag chair to sit in. Visuals, right? A lot of classrooms now have smart boards. So when we're not using the smart boards, can we have pictures of nature? Can we have pictures of animals? Can we have pictures of babies? You know, what can we have that give children something fun to look at? The sounds. Can there be soft music playing in the background that sometimes kids don't even notice, right? Vivaldi. There's a lot of studies on Vivaldi, and the timing, the tempo of the music is very good when you're pregnant because it gets you back to what your heart rate is supposed to be, right? And that baby is going off of your heart rate. So think about Vivaldi playing in your classroom or playing in your office, right? And all of a sudden, your heart starts beating to that, right? And your breathing starts beating, or you're breathing according to what you should be breathing. Exercise, right? We sit too much. Kids sit too much. Adults sit too much. We got to get up. We got to move. We have to get the cortisol out, right? That stress hormone. We have to get it out, right? We got to move. There's also a lot of studies that standing actually engages creativity, right? So we have standing desks. Kids can stand. Kids can, do things. Take the kids outside. Take the kids to the gym. Go for a walk. Use yoga. Breathing. Don't assume people know how to do it, right? And you tell kids to take a deep breath and they hyperventilate, right? They start going, we need to teach them how to do it, right? Hands on their stomach, feeling their stomach go in and out. Having them lay down with a stuffed animal, watching the stuffed animal go up and bring it back down, right? Don't let them fall off your stomach. You have to have control of it. Sewing, cooking, baking. Following recipes, following instructions with repetition increases frontal lobe development. Executive brain, the smart brain, the rational brain, right? The part of the brain that can counteract triggers and that amygdala hijack, right? We are going to, it's like a muscle. We're going to practice it. We're going to use it. Using multiple messages. I think this is so important. If we suspect someone has been a victim of domestic violence or child abuse, traumatic brain injury is real. And people, chances are they may have at one time been hit in the head or they may have fallen. And how do we deal with people that we know have memory issues? We do a lot of accommodations for people. Let's just assume if someone's been a victim of a crime, a victim of abuse, there's a chance they may have some brain injury. They may have some memory issues. So let's offer them multiple messages, right? They can see it visually. They can hear it. There may be pictures. The schedule may be posted, right? Maybe we use hand signals. Maybe when a certain song comes on, that's a tradition. When we do something with the lights, we know that something's going to change, right? But we give them all of these ways to help them get the messaging. I like this idea of sunglasses or Post-it notes, but the kids can have access to something red, something yellow, and something green. And when they put those red sunglasses on, or when they put that red Post-it note on the top of the desk, they're letting us know I'm in trouble and I need some help. And they're going to have to work through it, right? Green, I'm good, right? I'm in charge of my emotions. Everything's good. Yellow, I'm having some trouble. I probably need to take a break. I need to go up and get a drink of water. I need to move my body around. I need to do something, right? And letting them tell us. That is huge for emotion regulation, giving them the skills to do it. Disclosure, we need to listen. We need to be ready to hear what people are saying. Sometimes we're not going to get the whole story, right? So we have to listen, 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 right? Don't assume, I like this, assume you're going to get the easy expected answer first, right? And people are going to say the most important answers later for trust. And for kids, It's going to come out in play. It's going to come out in art. It's going to come out in stories. So are we listening to what people are trying to tell us? Again, just encouraging disclosure. I talk a lot about this choke versus strangle. Strangle is the appropriate term when someone is using their hands or something around your neck to try to limit your ability to breathe. You choke on a piece of meat, you are strangled if someone's trying to restrict your breathing. But choke is the common word that people use. Were you strangled? No. Was that person choking you? Yes. So, again, looking at the words that people use and how they use it. Hope and survival, right? We have a lot of children who are adults now who are survivors of domestic violence. But there was something or someone that connected with those kids along the way. And is there something that we can do to connect to kids? Again, we do a better job of identifying domestic violence, but that is just one piece of the puzzle. We need to go in and look and see what else is going on. How are the children? How is the mental health, right? How are the finances? Can you afford food, right? Can you afford housing? How is everyone doing with their mental health? How is everyone using substance, right? We have to go through and we have to ask these questions and get the whole story. And lastly, just some references that I have left for you. Thank you so much for joining the webcast today. I look forward to having you join some future ones. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.